just this body is just a piece of machinery that will do what it has to do.
How do you feel about that young girl that was going through that?
I feel really sad for her, because there is a little voice that goes, you can't carry on like this. But then the other voice, the bigger voice, goes, you haven't got a choice. But I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was actually going mad.
You write about how you turned into a robot.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by a robot?
Okay, so I think I found it the only way I could survive the experience was by switching off my feelings. I had to eat a certain way. I had to exercise a certain amount, and I couldn't not do it. So I had to switch off any of those like human emotions or any of those, just even listening to my own body. There was a task that had to be done and I had to complete it. I'm a robot. I must do it. And that was kind of my inner dialogue.
And you recount this this day of reciting that while being on a running machine, which I found almost quite unnerving and quite strange, looking in the mirror and telling yourself that you're a robot.
Yeah.
That actually happened? You were looking in the...
I can completely remember being in the gym right now, in the treadmill, kind of in the middle of a row of treadmills. And yeah, that was my way of coping. To like shut down, shut off. Just this body is just a piece of machinery that will do what it has to do. And there was no choice. That was the thing, there was no choice. That was the way it had to be. And it wasn't until I had, which I imagine was a breakdown in 2000 when I just, I hit rock bottom and that's when I kind of fell apart because the robot wasn't working anymore.
Have you, when you think back at that young girl, how do you feel about her as an much more mature person now? Yeah. How do you feel about that young girl that was going through that?
I feel really sad for her. I feel like, it was the most incredible time of my life and the hardest. And as much as I enjoyed it, it was joyless, because I had a secret and I was dealing with what I had to deal with and living my dream at the same time. It's a head fuck, is what it is, because I wouldn't change anything. I'd change that. I'd change that I became the victim of an eating disorder and exercising obsessively. I wish that hadn't happened to me, so I could have fully enjoyed the wonderful things that happened to me 100%. Life isn't perfect. There's always issues. There's always things we have to overcome. But it was fucking dramatic in how it went down.
What would you say to her if you could speak to her?
I'd say sorry. I do. I feel sorry that I did that to her. Yeah. I think I've been angry as well. I think I've aimed anger at other people. But I think as an adult, you have to take responsibility for your actions. I don't want to sound bitter and twisted, but there were people, or, the tabloid media. I don't want to bitch and moan about the tabloid media, but, they probably need to be bitched and moaned about because they've been a disgrace. But yeah, I feel sorry. I feel regretful.
What would you say sorry to her for?
For putting her through that. Putting her through that. And it feels like I have a lot of guilt attached to what I was representing, but what was really going on behind closed doors. And you know what? I'm such an honest person. I can't lie. I'm so bad at lying, and I feel so dishonest if I'm not bearing my soul to people. But I was living a lie, and that's probably the hardest part of it.
That secret, the secret you're referring to is the eating disorder and the obsessive exercising, right? The secret you were keeping. When you say eating disorder, are you referring to the binge eating disorder? Did that come after?
That was later, yeah.
Okay.
So, and the weird thing is actually, as you put it like that, it's like I was in denial for a long time as well. Because there is a little voice that goes, you can't carry on like this. But then the other voice, the bigger voice, goes, you haven't got a choice. And the first eating disorder, I started to just to eat less, smaller portions, and then I started to eliminate food groups to a point because I was terrified of fat, and then I was terrified of carbs, and then I wouldn't eat a banana because it's got too much sugar in it. I mean, I do not even know how I survived, and I think often now I get so exhausted. I think it's probably through years of being malnourished. I lived on fruit and vegetables for about 2 years, and I was underweight. My period stopped. You know, I've always wanted to be a mum, but I had no choice but to live this life I was living, and I was jeopardising the chance of being a mum. I mean, how crazy is that? It's just this compulsion.
And then it all comes to a head in 2000 when the...
Yeah. I think like a lot of, and I want to say a lot of women, but a lot of people really hate their bodies. You know, I hate this. Or we used to get asked in interviews, or, you know, what's your favourite, what would you call them, like your favourite attribute or whatever? You know, what do you like least about yourself? You know, what? Stupid fucking questions. Why would you ever say, never be negative in an interview, right? Never pull people towards your vulnerability. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I hate my short stubby legs. You know what I mean? Just really focus on them. But yeah, I hated myself. I was never good enough. Nothing's good enough. Women do this all the time. We pull ourselves apart. You know, I'm not funny enough. I'm not clever enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not sexy enough. All these things. And it's like, fuck, this body is amazing. And I spent all of those years just hating it because it wasn't what I wanted it to be. But you are not your body. You know, I was talking to my family this weekend. I lost an older sibling a few years ago. And we were talking about when people pass, and, you know, and sadly he died of cancer. And we know in the last stages, people with cancer, it's awful to see them in that way. But I don't remember him in that way. I remember the essence of him. I remember how funny he was and how naughty he was, and it's not. I don't remember anything physical, you know. And it's just, we just need to get away from this physical being. What defines us? Fuck off! It's not what defines us. We are so much more than that. And I've completely forgotten what the question was, but I just got caught up.
No, it's so powerful, and yeah. It was linked to. All of that sort of suppression and self-abandonment coming to a head in 2000. Yeah. So exactly, and I'd spent years like trying to make myself smaller, you know, fit into the form that I should be, to be doing the thing that I'm doing, and it was killing me. And this is why I started talking about my body, because I'm so grateful to my body, because it took over, and it said to me, we can't do this anymore. You're not doing this anymore. We are taking the control away from you. And it was hard because from being very restrictive with my eating and being anorexic, I started binge eating because my body, it couldn't cope anymore. It wasn't getting enough fuel. And I was depressed. I didn't know I was depressed. That never even crossed my mind that I had depression. I just knew I'd lost control over my eating, and that freaked me out because it was all about the way I looked. You know, it was vanity. I was like, fuck, I'm eating loads. And, you know, I feel very grateful I was never bulimic. I tried. I couldn't make myself sick. And I'm so grateful for that, because I know it's a really difficult illness to recover from. So I was getting bigger and bigger and bigger because I was eating more and more and more. And then it was the vanity that took me to the doctors, as well as being really fucking scared because I didn't know what was going on. And I was struggling to get out of bed. And that was when I was diagnosed with depression. And that was my first step on the road to recovery. You go to that doctor who ultimately diagnoses you with depression. Can you remember that day vividly?
I do. I really do. I remember sitting opposite him at his desk. And I think I said everything out loud for the first time about my eating, about crying and not being able to leave the house. I mean, I didn't have the words. I didn't know what anxiety was. I didn't know what depression was. So,
what did you say to him? Just because I want to get a colour of what the symptoms were that you hadn't yourself pinpointed as.
Well, I was tired all the time. I couldn't control my eating. I mean, I terrified myself because sometimes I'd catch myself mid binge. It was such a compulsive thing. I'd just be in the middle of just eating, and I'd be like, what are you fucking doing? You know, and anyone, and then sadly I know lots of people have these issues, it's like a cycle, because you do it and then you hate yourself. So you do it again, and then it just keeps, getting worse and worse, and to the point where I had to go to the doctor. But I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was actually going mad. And I didn't have the right words, and I know they are not the right words that we use today, but those were the words I had. And he said, well, first of all, we have to deal with your depression. And it was like this weight was just lifted from my shoulders, because it was like, oh my God, it's got a name. It's something that can be treated. It's something you can recover from. And that was the beginning of a very, very long journey.